Welcome everyone to Slalom Supply Chain Fireside Chat. I'm your host Harshad Kanvinde, leader of Slalom's global supply chain practice. In today's episode, my guest is Joel Beal, co-founder and CEO of Alloy. We discuss a variety of things related to digital innovation in supply chain. Welcome everyone to the Fireside Chat. Today we have Joel Beal, co-founder and CEO of Alloy, supply chain startup, with us. Joel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really great to have you here, and looking forward to a great discussion with you about multiple things in supply chain. But why don't we start with you giving us a little bit about your background, what Alloy is all about, and we can get started there.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me today. As Harshad mentioned, my name is Joel Beal. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Alloy. We're about at this point, a 5-year-old supply chain technology company. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We also have a number of people up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and a team out in Berlin, Germany as well. And I actually originally came out to the Bay Area now it's been a little over a decade ago as a PhD student in economics. So I came out here on the academic path, planning to follow kind of my family path and becoming a professor, and ended up dropping out after a couple of years just because there were so many cool technology companies, coming out of the Bay Area, and a lot of really interesting things that were happening. The first job that I had out of graduate school was a very nice transition from the academic world to the business world. I worked with a company that was kind of a mix of software and services that did, the best way to describe it is, data science back before data science was really a term a decade ago, primarily for large retailers, large CPGs, restaurant chains, really trying to understand customer demand and running large scale A/B tests, essentially, of different initiatives, whether that was a pricing change, a CapEx spend, remodeling a location, any kind of operational shift. And it was, basically being able to play with, massive amounts of point of sale, inventory data, operational data, and understand the effectiveness of this. And so it allowed me to kind of nerd out and use a lot of the things that I learned in school, but also start to see just the power of, technology that you could bring to bear against this, something that I wasn't necessarily as aware of. So that was kind of my introduction, if you will, to supply chain, or at least a part of it. I then spent some time in financial technology, so in a different part of technology, but always was really interested in supply chain, just because it's such a fascinating, I think, both for me personally, as an economist, it's kind of like the fundamental, infrastructure behind the economy, all the physical goods that we use every day, as well as just from kind of a technology standpoint, a fascinating space. And so I was really interested in getting back involved there. I saw a lot of opportunity, and started Alloy, as I mentioned, about 5 years ago. And at Alloy, our vision is really around better, connecting the modern supply chain and making it much more demand oriented or demand driven. I know demand driven has some connotations in supply chain, but really, our belief is that we can better link what's happening in real time about what consumers are buying, what those purchasing patterns look like, and connecting that back with all the decisions that are being made in that supply chain, from the sourcing, the production, the logistics, the inventory allocation, and connecting those all in a far more modern and smarter way. So that was really the genesis behind Alloy a couple of years ago. And today we've got customers around the world. We have team members around the world, working with a lot of fantastic companies. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that in our chat.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think, Joel, we live in an interesting time. Last 14 months, obviously, has been very impactful in variety of different ways. COVID-19 induced pandemic, and supply chain is now kind of top of mind for many people. It has become a kitchen table conversation topic.
Right.
But even before that, I remember the first time we met, probably 2019 or earlier, when I did that event in Seattle, focusing on digital innovation in supply chain. And we're talking about some of the same things that are on the surface now: agility in supply chain, how visibility in supply chain is important, demand driven, and understanding who you serve and what kind of supply chain you need to create for serving those needs, as you're mentioning. And any big company, many of your clients also have multiple supply chains within those companies. It's not just one supply chain, one size fits all. So all that stuff we were talking 3 years back, and now the emphasis that the pandemic has put on those same things. What are you seeing when you work with your customers? Some of them are, I think, publicly. Valvoline, for example, is public story on your website and so on. So these customers, when you serve them for their supply chain visibility, supply chain planning, or connected supply chain kind of needs, what challenges they are facing that are top of mind, and how talk to us about those, and talk to us about how those problems or challenges have evolved, especially during last year, and what kind of things these guys are asking you for help with.
Yeah. Well, it is maybe the pandemic hasn't been fun per se, but it is nice that I feel like people are talking a lot more about supply chain. I mean, as you mentioned, it's in the news all the time. I feel like I can talk to my parents about what I do, and they relate to it a little bit more than maybe they did historically. And there's no doubt that, I mean, on many different levels, the past year plus has I think led to a lot of fundamental change in how people think about supply chains. And there's a couple of things we've seen across our customers, in particular. I think first and foremost, the demand patterns for products have just massively shifted in ways that have been very unpredictable. Some more than others. And you look at early on in the pandemic, what people were buying. I mean, this is, there's been a lot of research now on this. I know, a lot of firms were putting out, these are the categories that are growing. These are the categories that are shrinking. So you saw that increase in, customer staples and, food and, things like that. And then it shifts as the pandemic goes on. I mean, we've seen, for example, a huge amount of growth in toys and games, just as a category, because that's a category that's done fantastically well as more people are at home playing games. You look at things like, electronics, something that was hurt early on and then has really bounced back. Same thing's true for like sporting goods outdoors. So you're seeing just these big shifts in what's happening and what people are seeing demand for. Now, oftentimes though, within the same company, it's not like uniform. It's not as though all of my SKUs are doing well or all my SKUs are doing poorly. In many cases, people are seeing certain SKUs that do exceptionally well, some that fall back. And it's just, again, that can shift, as things go on. And so, that's certainly, I think, like the number one thing that's top of mind, at least when we talk to companies, is just the lack of predictability. So there's the overall demand patterns, and then there's how people are buying, right? This has gotten a lot of attention. I think people often outline it as being like, well, there's this shift to e-commerce, which has obviously been a trend for a long time and will continue to be until we reach some steady state, I guess, between kind of online and offline purchasing. But there's all this buy online, pick up in store. There's all these hybrid models that are kind of appearing. Again, they existed before the pandemic, but all of this has been just accelerated by years. And, for our customers, I mean, early in the pandemic, they were dealing with we have inventory that's stuck in stores. Like, we know where inventory is, but it's in locations where we can't use it and we can't sell it. And maybe we're running out of inventory and fulfillment centers, and what flexibility do we have? So we saw a lot of things like that. Now, as I think at this stage in time, people have kind of gotten a little more used to what things are going to look like. But the common refrain from everyone is like, how much can we learn from last year? How much of that is useful and how much of it should we kind of ignore? I was in a sales call a week or two ago, and somebody was just like, can we basically just ignore 2020? Like, we don't want to use it in any of our, comps. We don't want to use it in our forecasts, just basically act as though that year wasn't there. I think maybe that's the right decision for some folks, probably for others it isn't. But that's, I think right now there's these big questions about how much can we learn from that, and how much is it just a total outlier that we should set aside and we're going to return to whatever steady state we were in before. And so I think, to me, that's like the big thing a lot of people are grappling with is, it's like, where do things kind of end up as we're, starting to come out from our houses and things go back to quote unquote normal? What does that normal look like?
No, that's a great point, right? So understanding the demand and the purchasing patterns, that's always the problem. It's COVID or not COVID.
Right.
You always want to do that. So understanding that, and by virtue of that, then having enough visibility into what your customers are doing and what your consumers are doing, that's always a target. And funny enough, I remember early in the pandemic, people were like, and similar to what you just said, forget 2020. It never happened. These kind of events, what happened with COVID, or what happened with the Suez Canal thing last week, right, there are always going to be those one-off things that you can't anticipate, you can't predict, but it's not 1 or 0, right? So it's because you can't do these things, predict these things perfectly, not doing anything shouldn't be an option too. The answer lies somewhere in between. So continuously monitoring what's happening with your customers and consumers and getting as much insight you can. I mean, it's not going to be 100% accurate demand forecast every single time, but getting closer and closer and closer on an ongoing basis. Many companies still don't get that. Or maybe it's human psyche. As an economist, probably you can throw some light on it better than I do. But what I see is that this 1 or 0 mentality, or find me a silver bullet mentality, that's always there. So in your conversations with clients, as you think about how can I get better than yesterday, it might not be a perfect solution, but at least I'm better than where I was before. I'm sure you get into these kind of conversations through your sales discussions and through your ongoing implementation discussions with the customer. Shed a light on that how those things work. What kind of things, what's the mindset of your customers when they think about an alloy, or when they think about technology solutions for these traditional supply chain problems? Are they still looking for silver bullet? Or is there enough of an understanding that, hey, I'm not going to solve this perfectly, but I can still get a little bit better than where I was yesterday?
Yeah, well, I think both happen. I think most people are pretty realistic in knowing that you're not going to just buy a piece of technology and all your problems are going to be solved, or, make a change in your process or have a new initiative or something to that effect. It doesn't mean, though, people don't try sometimes. And it's interesting, as we talk to companies, we're always trying to help them find that right balance. Obviously, we're trying to learn ourselves. We don't know their business as well as they do, and saying, as you think of, look, we're trying to create more agile, responsive supply chains. I think that's the goal of you and what you're doing and what we're doing, and probably anybody that's going to listen to this. So we all kind of, we want that approach, and you have to take that same kind of approach in how you're thinking about applying technology to make your supply chain better, and to help yourself. And so you want to have that big vision. You want to have that goal, right? Of saying, hey, we can be in a state 5-10 years from now that's going to be very different. We all are. I mean, technology is changing really fast here. And I think the rate of adoption, the embrace of it, It's just, how rocky is that ride going to be getting there? But we're always looking to, it's like find a problem that is, has real ROI that, matters, for your business and that you can get alignment on. But don't let it scope creep so much. And I think that's what I see is people often vacillate. Sometimes it'll come in and they'll be like, I'm not sure there's really a problem here. And then it's like, they get excited. They see a demo, right? Or they hear about an application that's like, oh my gosh, like my eyes have been opened about what is possible. Well, man, now I could add this and I could add this and I can add this. And, of course we want to sell, but you're also trying to sit there and be like, okay, that might be more than we want to bite off to start with. Like, let's right size that piece. And that's an iterative process. But it's definitely it's a balancing act. And, I'll say, being on the other side, it's obviously excited when people, see something and then they, their appetite or their stomach gets big and they're like, ooh, I want to do all these things. And so we can all have to kind of like take a step back and be like, why don't we just start here? Let's bite off this piece. Let's prove the value. And let's prove that we can change as a company. It's not just the technology part. It's, the change management, getting people to adopt a new way of thinking, have that settle in, and then you bite off the next chunk. And I think we've seen with our most successful customers, usually they're not going all in on day one. Usually it really is, there's that kind of clearly defined problem they want to start with. We prove it out, and then they expand and they kind of follow that pattern, right? It's not even like you go from like, you prove it out and then you go huge. It's obviously you prove out a part and then you tackle that next section and then you tackle that next section. And, we're still going to have lots of supply chain problems 10 years from now, but I think we're going to all be a lot further on that journey than we are today.
No, I think spot on. So as you said, agility is kind of our goal as well. And many people are on the same boat. And what you said about scaling, right? So some people get it right. And that's where we see a lot of success, that it's not that you see a demo and you have this grand vision and you go all in on day one and everything becomes hunky-dory and you go on a beach and now enjoy your blue label. That doesn't work, right? So it's a continuous motion. It takes a lot of effort over multiple years to get it right. And as I said, I mean, there are some companies, some groups in those companies just get it and they see a lot of success. And somewhere it takes more of an effort to bring people to see that point of view. It takes more effort on our part. But I think you're spot on. So another related thing I wanted to talk to you, Joel. You hinted to that. So as we think about digital and digital innovation in supply chain, we have been talking about that for quite some time, even before COVID. People look at an Amazon and, hey, I want to be like Amazon when it comes to supply chain. But it's not just about technology. You talked about change management being important and so on. So are there some characteristics in the way companies are organized, or the leadership in those companies, or the culture of those companies, where you see it's more fun to work in certain environments and people kind of get it, and you are on this path, iterative path, that you know that it's going to be more successful than some other examples. What are those characteristics? If I may, I mean, sorry for putting you on spot there, and obviously I'm not expecting to name any names, but certain characteristic in supply chain leaders that indicate more successful path for digital adoption and using digital technology in the right way to solve the supply chain problems.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple things that come to mind. I mean, one is, it's changing something is hard. And there's no easy way that you're just going to change your company's culture and the way that you approach technology without there being some bumps in that road. So I think, getting back to this idea of there being a magic bullet, oftentimes people just want to kind of jump from the start to the end, and you don't want to deal with that, what can sometimes be a little bit of a rocky middle period. As everybody adjusts, as you implement, as you tweak things and get it right. And so certainly one characteristic you're looking for is someone who sits there and says, look, this is the vision. We're going to get to that end path and we're going to kind of push through the things that come up. And when you talk about being, again, these terms like agile and innovative and transformation, the things that get thrown around all the time, there's an element of there is risk associated with that. And there's going to be failure as part of that too. Like you're going to make decisions that aren't going to end up being the right ones. But the key thing is that, well, one, you don't bet the whole company on it, to start with. It's like, that's why you want to start small. You want to try some things, but things that have real meaning. And you kind of go along and you're like, look, we learn from the things that are successful and we enjoy those. We're also going to learn from the things that don't work as well. We might not enjoy that part as much, but I think that's one of the things that we see. I mean, with our best partners, it's not like everything we do works exactly as planned. It's like sometimes things work amazingly well. And sometimes it's like, hey, you got to work through things. You find out there's nuances you didn't understand. But I think to me, it's like the leaders that really kind of understand that, embrace that, and don't deviate from that, end vision are the ones that are really successful. And again, kind of like understand that is part of this iterative process of getting there. It's part of the journey. Like if you were always making the safe pick, right? If you were, just, first of all, the safe picks often aren't as safe as you think.
Right, exactly.
I think a lot of the, it's like, what's the old phrase? It's like nobody got fired for buying IBM or whatever. But they're, oftentimes the safe picks aren't so safe. It's like everything's going to have some element of risk. But I think it's just reminding ourselves that that's like part of that journey of transformation, is there's going to be ups and downs in that. And you kind of learn through the whole process, and you do end up in a better place. If you keep at it, you're going to find the solutions that really make a difference, and you're going to embrace those, and you're going to drive those forward, and you're going to be at a different place.
Fantastic. So let's make a switch here. So you as an aspiring PhD candidate and making that hard turn into supply chain, 5-6 years, right? So you have been on this journey. How is it going? I mean, is it panning out as you expected 5 years back? Better than that? What are you personally excited about when it comes to Alloy and supply chain?
Yeah, well, it's certainly been, man, it's hard to even think back. Like 5 years ago, what did I expect this journey was going to be like? But it's been awesome. I mean, it's fun. I think I certainly was, I think as I mentioned at the beginning, I was attracted to supply chain because just from a personal, intellectual standpoint, I think they're fascinating. I think they're so cool. They're these incredibly complex, systems that are, on one hand, amazingly resilient, and on the other hand, so brittle at times. I mean, it's kind of amazing how they can break, and it's amazing like the things that they can kind of operate. And to me, it's just kind of a microcosm for the broader economy. And so I certainly would say, my kind of enthusiasm for the problem and the opportunity. I mean, it's like every time you flip over a new rock, you find a new problem that can be solved, that can drive like real tangible value for people. And that is so fun. Now, supply chains are complicated. And I think it's a space that has, there are a lot of still like very fundamental challenges, that I think are being solved or in the process of being solved. And, so I think that's always like a learning for us. We're a platform that's all about, giving people, helping people connect with their partners, get all the data from those partners, be able to learn from that and drive smarter decisions. And, there's a lot of data to collect. There's a lot of cleaning to do. There's obviously so many different things you can solve with that information. And so how do you prioritize them? Which ones of them are scalable? Which ones of them aren't? So I think, that's been certainly part of the journey, and the learnings is sometimes you'll find this thing that's just this incredible nugget. And sometimes it's, it's more painful. I mean, when I talk about this process of transformation, we go through that as a software company, day in, day out, right? We build out new products. Sometimes they work better. Sometimes they don't. And so I feel like I'm going through those ups and downs, but it's, sitting there and always being anchored on, long term. I'll bet if you and I spoke about where do we think supply chains are going to be a decade from now? Like, what's it going to look like? What's the technology going to look like? What's the workforce going to look like? I'll bet they're pretty similar. It's like, I think we all know where we're trying to get. It's just now going through that journey of saying, man, there's a lot of legacy technology. There's a lot of data silos. There's a lot of, people that are used to working in one way, and that needs to adapt to working in a different way. And that's the messiness in between that we're all kind of going through, both, whether it's as a software provider, whether it's on the, as a consulting firm helping with that change management, whether it's a practitioner is running a supply chain at a company. I think we're kind of all on that journey together.
And that messiness is fun, right? So that messiness is where we thrive, and most of the innovation happens in that space where people are trying to change things. And legacy systems is just one inhibitor, probably. There are many others, but as simple as, to understand the concept of visibility, end-to-end visibility, we need to know where the inventory is. We need to know what my customers and consumers are doing. To solve that's a pretty overwhelming problem. And to your point, I think there is technology available to help with that, but that process of getting from how do you do today versus getting there with using these new tools and new technology, that's a pretty messy field there.
Yep.
But all fun. This is a problem of plenty, as you have realized over the last 5 years, and finding our niche to build that product and platform, or build a workable solution. It's no joke. So congratulations for successfully being on that path for that those 5 years. I think, I think for the audience that don't know this yet, but Joel grew up in Seattle area, and probably that supply chain and technology, I think that's in the air in Seattle. So I think so some of that should be attributed to your upbringing, I guess, Joel.
That's right. I
pulling you back to supply chain and tech.
That's probably right. The first house I lived in until I was 3 years old is a stone's throw away from the Microsoft campus. So I grew up right there, and then ended up in the Bay Area. So I feel like I've been surrounded by technology most of my life.
Awesome. So to close this, this was a great discussion, Joel. Obviously, we'll chat more. But for today's episode, to close the discussion, any closing thoughts or any practical advice for supply chain leaders out there who are listening to the show?
Yeah, I think it's just, I know it's been a crazy year, and I think I think the good side of it is anytime we have these big disruptive events, it is a catalyst for change. Some of it forced. There's lots of things that we've all had to do different because we had no other choice. But I think, it also oftentimes just creates momentum about a lot of the changes that many people are thinking about right now, wanting to do. And again, I see this as, as running a business myself, and how can we change because we've learned new things about ourselves this past year. So I do think it's look, we're in a time with the economy's great. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. There's a lot of willingness to do things differently. Again, this aligns with any long-term goals that we have, and I just feel like it's going to be an exciting next year, because I see that kind of all that interest and energy kind of pent up and ready to go. So I think this is the year to try something new, mix it up, whether, again, that's on the technology side or changing the process or, doing something else, kind of personally. But that to me is like, these are the times where you just see that kind of rapid change in things. So I'm excited to see what 2021 has in store for us.
Amen to that. I think 2021 and 22 will be better than 2020. Let's definitely hope for that. On that note, let's end this discussion, this episode here. Thanks a lot again, Joel, for spending time with me. And we'll continue our discussion.
Sounds good. Thanks, Harshad.
Bye.